So welcome everyone to another Making Leadership Mindful webinar. I'm so excited to have so many of you join us again this month. And August is really exciting for us because we're actually going to be doing a 3-part webinar series, and it's going to be looking at how we can build psychologically strong workplaces. So this first session that we're doing today is actually the first of 3. And we will be looking at building resilient workplaces today. And I have a very special guest on board to help me deliver this session for you. So in just a moment, I am going to introduce you and hand over to Kate Conley. Now, Kate is an organizational psychologist, and she's on a mission to re-engineer our relationship with work for one that's more positive, productive, and meaningful. Now, Kate has contributed to psychometric assessment, coaching, and development of leaders in organizations in multiple industries and across the world, particularly in the US and in Australia, where Kate is now based in Sydney. So Kate's also currently completing her PhD from the University of Georgia. She also serves as a thought leader on today's pressing topics. She's authored white papers, spoken at international conferences, and she shares the latest advancements in the future of work, employee resilience, and mindfulness-based training. So Kate believes that the key to unlocking the full potential in people is intending to our basic human needs for purpose, belonging, and room for growth. So I am so excited to introduce you to Kate Conley here today. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to her to share her screen, and we're going to kick off this session on building resilient workplaces. So welcome everyone. And again, if you have any questions, please just pop them into that chat. Kate's really going to make this session quite interactive, and we're going to have some really practical tools here. So please throw any questions you have into the chat, and I will be reading them out for you so that we can address Kate as we go. So welcome, Kate, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexis, for that introduction and for having me here today. I'm really excited. We've been nerding out back and forth about different things along the lines of mindfulness and leadership and resilience. So really excited to be talking to you today about resilience. It's probably not something unusual to be hearing about, and it's probably something that we could all use a bit more of in what's going on in the world today. So really excited to be here. I'm just gonna pop my screen up for you and we will dive in. When I moved to Australia about 2 years ago exactly this month, I was really excited to be putting myself through a test of resilience. Now, as a resilience researcher, that is exactly as nerdy as it sounds. I was really excited to expand my horizons. I thought, moving abroad, be able to tackle anything after that. Your perspectives will be broadened, all that fun stuff. But I ended up learning even more about resilience from the Australian people. I mean, from the bushfires to COVID, of course, we've all experienced that. And really inspiration from the oldest continuous world. And there's something small that we do here in Australia, but it's noteworthy. So I want to start off by acknowledging the country before we jump into the conversation today. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the land of which we meet and that I'm joining you from today, the Gayamagal people of the Eora Nation. And before we jump into the conversation, I really just want to honor and respect their elders past, present, and those still to come. Because there's a lot we can learn about resilience from our Indigenous populations. So I just invite you to be thinking about that and to give some thought and reflection to the lands on which you are joining from today and your Indigenous people and their histories. So Alexis gave a great introduction, a bit of my background. I have a hybrid researcher consulting training, and it makes me what some like to call a pracademic. Just a fancy way to say that I'm a big nerd trying to apply the evidence-based practices out in the wild in the workplace. And as Alexis mentioned, I'm really on a mission to just rethink what work means to us in our lives, to have it be more human-centric, to have it be something that is joyful, not stressful, something that adds positivity and fulfillment. So conversations like this today, I think, are a part of that, a part of really understanding how we work and how we work together in our teams. When I take a look at the attendance list for today and seeing some names and faces here with us, this is such a large group and it's such a global group that I really want to invite you to be learning from each other. So if you've been on a session with me before, I tend to want to facilitate conversations and get everyone involved. It's not going to be as easy today with this amount of people. So please go ahead right now and pop open your chat. I'm going to actually open mine as well. So pop open the chat. You should all be able to enter some questions in there, as Alexis mentioned. But I also want to get a sense of what has worked well for you and your teams as we go through. Please share tips because there's so much that you can learn from each other, in addition to some of the things that I'll share with you as well. So to kick us off and to get your chat open, go ahead and just type in your name and where you're joining from today so we can get a sense of who's with us, geographical context, all of that fun stuff. If you feel like putting in your company name, go ahead, but just say a little hello, put in where you're joining from. And as we've been hearing in conversations, a little bit of positivity can't hurt during times like this. So if you also want to put in there something that makes you smile or laugh, no matter what is going on, just a little something in there, positivity again, to start sharing ideas with each other. For me, it's watching my dang cat, go out on the patio and roll around in the sun. Like there is absolutely no care in the world, getting sand and all sorts of stuff in her fur, but she's so happy and that always makes me smile no matter what. Also reading those kind of like texts that have gone wrong, those things make me laugh, no matter how sad or no matter what I'm feeling. So go ahead, pop that into the chat. It is going off right now, so that's fantastic. I can't read all of those later.
Oh, and someone's also posted in here cat videos as well. And I fully concur with that, especially during these lockdown times.
Yes, I actually don't even feel that bad anymore scrolling through some of those because like you just need that little burst of laughter. I think my partner is sick of receiving them though. All right. So let's dive in to the conversation today. Resilience is something that's just being thrown around a lot right now. We're hearing it, we're seeing it on our news feeds, we're seeing it on social media all over, we're talking about it in our teams and our organizations. But what is resilience? So resilience is a process of experiencing adversity and either bouncing back, rebounding from that, or even growing as a result. So today I'm going to use this construct or that definition to be talking about resilience. So really thinking about resilience as a process. This is going to help us actually do something about it and to be able to build up what we need to help us be more resilient. Now, resilience is it's a term that comes from a lot of different disciplines, from ecology, from different systems and engineering. It also comes from child development and human studies. So that's where I was first introduced to it, my first graduate seminar of my PhD program. And I learned how children, with all the odds stacked against them, some kids were able to have the successful and healthy life trajectory after that. But also thinking about family systems and how families were able to come back from tragedies and traumas. And we realized a lot of these things also apply to the workplace. They apply to our employee experience and also our teams and how we get through things as a collective. So when I see the words resilience kind of flying around, I see the word like grit, right? Resilience is not just mental toughness, persisting to a goal, even if it's killing you, right? It's wearing down on your mental or physical health. That is grit. So that's that perseverance. It goes with the story of resilience, but it's a little different. And resilience is also not just a capacity. So you might hear the word resiliency. That's that trait or capacity describing one's ability to bounce back from stress and trauma. Now, I'm going to tell you a little secret. We all have that capacity. We all have the capacity to be resilient. Each and every time we face an adverse event, stress, a traumatic loss, we all have that ability to bounce back, no matter if we have in the past or if we feel like we're struggling through it. So yes, you might be wondering, okay, am I resilient right now? Like, I cannot cope with another variant of this virus. Like, I'm just maybe not a resilient person. I'm going to take that excuse away from you if that's okay, because we all have this capacity. And resilience is also not just bouncing back from a tough day at work. Yeah, maybe we can consider that micro resilience, but it's really recovery. And we need recovery rituals and routines every day to build up some resilience over time. But when we talk about resilience today, I want us to be thinking of really those big things that can happen, or the chronic periods of stress that we can go to and how we come back from that. And feel free to put any questions about this in the chat or argue with me, put a different view. Love to see that as well.
Kate, I just wanted to ask before you move on as well. I've had, I guess, this conversation with a few people speaking about resilience, and I've heard sometimes people say things like, I wasn't born resilient, or resilience isn't a personality trait of mine. Can you maybe help us to understand then, for those of us who maybe aren't feeling so resilient, whether or not this is in fact something that's innate in us, or it is something that we can kind of build into ourselves? Is there a difference there?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll try to limit the psychological answer of it depends too much here. Everything that makes us who we are is a combination of nurture and nature. But you are not just born, people aren't just born resilient or not. You might have some particular factors at play that increase your odds of being resilient, and some risk factors as well that can, take a toll on us, and we have to go through those, and they're different for everyone. But there's no such thing as just having a resilient personality. There are certain personality traits that are associated with being resilient. And the thing is, you can actually change your personality. You can choose how to respond to everything that happens to you. So again, I'm going to take that excuse away of not having a resilient personality. My PhD research findings that are coming through of seeing that we can use mindfulness as a way to shift out of our default personality states that we feel like we have. And for resilience in particular, it's actually using mindfulness to be more agreeable. So if you're familiar with the big 5 facets of personality, agreeableness is really having that other-oriented view, being trusting and trustworthy, being compassionate, and being humble as well, being modest. So if you can focus on increasing in agreeableness, okay, you can shift your personality. If you feel like you're not an agreeable person, you can shift out of that. And same thing with neuroticism. So if you feel like you're pretty anal or very emotionally sensitive, I'm with you there. But you can choose how to respond. You can choose to do things like mindfulness to actually build up that emotion regulation. And that also increases our resilience as well. Yeah, it's a great question.
What I'm hearing is we can all become resilient if we work at it then.
That's exactly right. Yeah. We may have a leg up if we've kind of experienced hardships already in our lives and we've been able to bounce back from that. That gives us the confidence to handle what might come next. But that does not mean that you don't have the capacity to be resilient if you haven't experienced a tough loss or if you haven't fought in a war. We can all still build up that resilience. And I'll show you how today. So thinking about resilience as a process, I like to be visual with it. So this is a model that I published with some colleagues back in 2016, and it's adapted from that human development and family studies literature. And it looks at how we experience adversity and go through a bit of a period of reorganization, kind of reset. And then it looks at the potential outcomes that we can have. So we can either, again, rebound, bounce back, or even grow from it. Or we can experience a non-resilient outcome, which is really having it all pile up against us, right? So today we're going to focus on this process. And we're going to talk about the things that increase our odds of these two resilient trajectories. So you might hear me say that a bit here. I like to think of this as a bit of gambling. I'm a bit of a gambling man myself. So what can I do to increase the odds, the statistical odds of me actually bouncing back or being more resilient? So today we're going to talk about that. We are going to take a focus on team resilience, though. I know there's been a lot out there about self-care and really important stuff around individual resilience. But I really wanted to take a bit of a different focus on collective resilience. So the things that we can do to increase the odds of our teams bouncing back after going through huge amounts of change, like restructuring or experiencing hardships, even experiencing the loss of a colleague to another organization and having to recoup and reset on workload. And for some across the world, it might be actually losing a colleague to COVID. So how do we work together to actually be resilient through that? And just because we are talking about mental health and well-being, it doesn't mean we don't have to take an outcomes focused view. So let's think about the outcomes here. If you're asking, well, is my team resilient or not? You can actually think about this line as team functioning. So this line could be your performance as a team, your financial performance, business performance. It could also be your team's productivity and output and efficiency. It can also be a means to look at your team culture. So how does going through an adverse period of time or a traumatic event, how does that impact your team culture? And how does that look when you bounce back from that? Or maybe even grow stronger as a team? Other outcomes that you can look at are retention. So sticking together as a team as well. All things that are imperative, right? Especially if you're a people leader on the call today. Thinking about resilience, thinking about compassionate leadership and being inclusive as a leader. Those aren't just nice to haves anymore. They are imperative because our business landscape is a bit all over the place. So we have to be resilient. We have to be thinking about this. Now, the alternative can happen again when we experience this chronic adversity. We don't have protective factors in play to help us bounce back. So what you might be noticing right now over time is that you might have people burning out, right? You've had people with a chronic workload, some demands on them, pressures both in and out of work, without the resources to be able to keep up with it. And over time, that leads to burnout. There's an amazing session on burnout that's coming up with Alexis at the end of the month, so join in on that. You might also notice that over time, that burnout actually leads to a collective burnout with your team, right? It's not just an individual experience. And that can create non-resilient team outcomes of turnover, mass turnover, absenteeism, or even presenteeism, where people are coming to work, but they're bringing half of themselves, or they're actually going counterproductive and they're showing behaviors of incivility, or even spreading those negative emotions, maybe not intentionally, but to others. And then you may have heard this term languishing has been coming up lately. Adam Grant put a spotlight on it. You might not have burnout in your team, but you might notice that your team is just kind of meh, just stagnant. There's a bit of aimlessness to what's going on. So what we want to do is look at the things, and we call them protective factors in the evidence. So these protective factors that are going to increase our odds of being able to get out of that, to get out of the burnout, to get out of the languishing, to get out of some of the severe mental health that we're seeing as well, to be able to bounce back in relationship to these outcomes as well. I'm going to pause there. Any questions that you're seeing, Alexis, that we should jump on right away?
Yeah, we have a few coming through. Let me just scroll back up to the top here. And we had a question come in from Wendy, and I didn't ask it earlier because I thought it was probably something we would touch on regardless. And that was, what's the relationship between resilience and expanding one's window of tolerance?
Wow. Tolerance is a big word. I think it really relates to what you're talking about. Chronic tolerance to stress, for example, you might be able to cope. So I didn't have coping on that last slide with all the fun words, but it also relates to the story. And we can cope actually as people. We have this innate ability to adapt. And we can all kind of persist in chronic stress for a while. You may have found with COVID, right? You learned how to cope with the fear of your loved ones getting sick. And you learned how to kind of put some things in place maybe to get through it. And some of those things might be Netflix binges, online shopping. I'm with you there. It helps us kind of get through it. And that can expand our tolerance. But again, it's more about what we've got in place every time something like this happens, and our ability to be aware of it and to pull ourselves out. And again, looking at our groups as well, our families and our teams.
Yeah. And Kate, just like looking at your graph here and knowing a little more around this concept of languishing, and knowing that languishing isn't in fact when we're in a place of burnout, but it's also the lack of flourishing. So I guess when we're looking at this concept of tolerance and coping, it's kind of, for me, feels like this question of where is it we want to be? Do we just want to be scratching by, or do we want to be in a place where people feel like they're flourishing and they're thriving? So I think we maybe can look a little more when you're talking about these growth factors. That's also something maybe for people to bear in mind as well. Like there's tolerating, but then there's, bringing joy and some of those things that you mentioned earlier into the workplace as well.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you'll see this line dips down. This is absolutely a core part of resilience as a process. If this line just continued, right, that could be that coping, and maybe it goes up and down a little bit, but you're not going to have the potential for that real growth unless you go through a period of resetting. So as individuals, that's resetting our habits, even things like our bedtime and morning routines. It's resetting our health and physical habits as well as our mental health habits. We kind of have to go through that icky period to be able to bounce back from it. And the same thing with going through resets in our teams. Sometimes you'll notice, maybe somebody leaves your team and that shakes things up, but we don't even really address it. And then all of a sudden our team culture is out of our hands, right? That we have habits or we're saying things that we don't want to be saying. So you have to kind of go through that period of discomfort, stepping outside of your comfort zone as well to learn. It's the same thing here with resilience and bouncing back. Yeah.
Great. And Kate, I just have also a question here from Larissa, which I think is relevant to what we're speaking about right now. And it's, can you be more resilient in particular events and situations and less so in others?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I think sometimes, not sometimes, we all kind of label people. It's how our brain makes sense of all of the noise and information in the world. We apply that to people as well. And sometimes people label you as somebody who's really strong because you've gotten through something in the past, maybe a messy divorce, or again, something happens at work, you were made redundant and you've been able to bounce back from that. And people are so impressed. And then one other thing happens and it just kind of can throw you completely off. And it's not relative, of course, there's severity of the event that matters, but sometimes we can be really resilient and other times not so much. And it really matters with what we've got in play at the time. And so I'll show you those protective factors. And I think Tamara just asked, about tools and techniques. So maybe that'll help make some sense of this. The first really practical thing that I'm going to recommend is actually just kind of keeping this visual in mind. If you are a people leader, set a calendar reminder, maybe weekly or monthly. Just reflect on how your team is doing, because this is dynamic. The nature of thinking of resilience is something that we can build and that can grow. It's dynamic, so we need to be keeping a pulse on it. Even if you are not a people leader, it's good to think about where you are at. So think about the last big stressor that happened to you. Where are you at now on this curve or this model? And reflect on that. Set a rhythm to reflect on that. If you are a leader, you have direct reports, make time to reflect on this as a team and to be bringing this together. Now, I would not be an IO psychologist if I also didn't recommend using some data. You can actually start measuring these things in a team. Survey your people. get a sense of where you're at to make sure you're not leaving anyone behind, and to keep a pulse on this, to celebrate as you do bounce back from the things that go wrong. So first tip, keep a pulse on this, set a calendar reminder to do it regularly. Otherwise, we're people, we're human, we forget. So the good stuff, thinking about what we can actually do to build resilience as a team. Now, I couldn't help but mention this already. We call these protective factors. These are mindsets and resources that we can put in place to help us increase our odds of having a resilient trajectory. So we can think of these kind of resources, perceptions of the event, the things that we have at our disposal, as almost like a parachute that we can put on when things go wrong, and also a bit of a trampoline base so that when we do fall, we've got that there to catch us and propel us upward. But we have to do this preventatively. We have to work and kind of nurture and cultivate these proactively. So they're called protective factors, and there are a number of them that have been identified for individuals. I'm going to show you, I think that's 7, that are protective factors that have been known to create team or collective resilience. So if we have time at the end, I'll go through the individual ones, but you'll notice that some of them relate. So even if you're not a people leader on the call today, you can absolutely see how some of these things can help you as an individual as well. So next slide here. These are the 7, and I'll keep this list up. Feel free to take a screenshot of it. We'll go through each one. And as a bit of a research nerd, I'm going to force myself to go really practical with you to give you some of these practical tips. So we'll go through each. Again, I'll give you 1 or 2 tips or tricks for each one. But there's such a great group of people here today. I definitely want to encourage you to kind of put into the chat how this could actually look in reality for your team. So given your context, what's going on, where you are in the world. And then also some of the things that have worked well for your team. So how have you actually put this into play really practically? What did you do? What happened? If you can share those into the chat, we can all learn from them. So we'll stick with the first one. We'll start there. You may notice before I jump in that mindfulness isn't up here as a singled out protective factor. We are on a mindful leader webinar, so it's a little odd, right? Well, it is a core protective factor for individuals. So I definitely wanted to make a note of it. Really, really important to create a mindfulness and meditation practice or habit. But I want you to see how it actually fits into a number of these other protective factors. We're seeing that mindfulness is becoming somewhat of a root construct in org psychology. And it's not that kind of root for my Aussie mates here on the call. It's a foundational or underpinning skill set and mindset that we can have that helps us build up these protective factors. It helps us strengthen our relationships, reduce stress and be able to manage our emotions, but also increase our productivity and our focus, which is really important. And when we think about team resilience, we could think about a composite of every single individual in your team and how resilient they are. But we want to actually be thinking about, again, the interdependency of the team. So these are the things that are going to help the group bounce back and for you not to leave any individuals behind. So it's a very inclusive way of thinking about it as well. All right, shared perspective. For those of you who joined Alexis's session on mindful communication, she mentioned that about 57% of employees don't feel like they have clear direction or are confused a lot of the time. Now, this is an alarming stat. You may feel as a leader that you communicate all the time, but it's true. And it's really, really important to have that mindful communication when things are going wrong or in times of crisis. The reason for that is if you are not on the same page, if people are lacking information on your team, their brain has gaps, right? They might not know what's coming, there's a bit of uncertainty. And you may take a guess about what happens then, what our brain does when we are missing information. We like to get imaginative and we make up scenarios. We go, okay, well, what if? Right, well, our team is changing. Some people are going to be moving. Well, what if we don't have this skill set on our team anymore? What if I'm going to have to take it on, right? What if my manager is actually upset with me and I'm going to be the one moving, right? We fill in these, a bit of paranoia that may not even be true yet. So again, that mindfulness brings us back to the present. So we're not anticipating futures that aren't real. But what we need during times of stress and the protective factor is having a shared perspective of what's going on, and also a shared sense of meaning for the team, so a bit of purpose as well. A key example here was actually during COVID-19. An individual from the Canadian government saw some remote working principles online and thought, I really like those. I want to set them for my team. So she worked with her team and set some working principles. And some of these aren't really directive of what you should or shouldn't do. Like the first one, it's, we heard we're not working from home. We're actually at home during a crisis trying to work. That's just a perspective, right? It's a different way of thinking about what's going on. And this individual from the Canadian government shared it with her team and then went viral through the whole government. And then it went viral globally. So this is something that signaled to the team, that perspective to get the team on board. But also help people understand the different perspectives that, each member of the team could be having. So my recommended tip here is make time for you to create this shared understanding when things go wrong, but also even before that. This is not too early to do this for remote or hybrid working. We're all still figuring it out. So bring the team together, have everyone candidly share thoughts, feelings, reactions. What are they even thinking? What's that scheme in their head of what it means to be working in the way they are right now? Remove judgment from that. And then to propose together some ways of how you want to think about it together. So how do we collectively want to be thinking about working from home or working in a hybrid way? When things go wrong, like a restructuring, how do we want to be thinking about redundancies or potential to lose the job? How do we want to be thinking about the opportunities that come from things? And then vote and set an agreed upon list and come back to it. It's one way to create that shared perspective and meaning.
Hey, we have a great question that's come in here from Jose, and he said, can shared perspective create conflict instead when there is a lack of trust on the team? And I do think you're going to speak to this a little later, but I'll let you answer it quickly now.
Yeah, we'll just actually go to number 6, just to mention it, because I'm not going to give a lot of time to it. Alexis has a great session on psych safety coming up. But I want to kind of challenge that thought and say, is that conflict bad? That conflict actually kind of getting that out, flexing that out is actually could potentially be positive. But yes, you've got to set the tone correctly. And you've got to create that trust. So trust and psych safety on your team is a huge protective factor and a shared resource that you have. And again, it's a collective one. You can't have some people feeling psych safety and other people not. Otherwise, you just don't have it, right? So set the tone with things like conflict in that way and acknowledge the differences. So with remote working, acknowledge that some people may be experiencing it differently than you. You don't have to feel what they're feeling. Actually, it's better not to, but to just acknowledge, okay, that's a struggle. That seems tough. Acknowledge that not everyone wants to be baking bread or has energy to be picking up a new hobby. We're all experiencing it differently, but let there be some space for everybody to kind of air that out on the table and then agree on where you are finding those similarities to move forward. And to then support each other. So ask each other, what do you need to be supported during these times? One thing I'll just kind of throw out there is, some people may say, I can turn off all notifications, I can put away my devices, but I still see emails that you send me past 9, 10 p.m. So something that would help me as an individual is if you could actually just delay the send of those emails to the next morning. That's just one easy way to support a particular person on your team as well. But you have to know what those are. All right. Great. Next one is flexibility to adapt. So I won't go into this too much because it's pretty straightforward, but flexibility is the #1 protective factor for collective resilience. And this is because when things are going wrong, we feel like our control is being taken away. And flexibility allows us to feel like we do have more of that control. We have the ability to adapt, and that is what helps teams adapt. So again, fairly straightforward, but we've got to implement it, right? So flexible working arrangements, flexible hours, telecommuting, it's been in place for a while. And so there's a lot of evidence around how it works and what we can do. So it's making sure people understand that you're not just saying, hey, yeah, if you need to change your hours to take care of your kids during the day or whatever it might be, that's great. You've got to actually show it as well and have it be in practice. A great podcast from Adam Grant lately was on sad days. So acknowledging that we need to be able to allow our team to take sick days and sad days. It's actually a bit more contagious to have people showing up in an awful mental state that spreads to our teams as well. It doesn't help us have a feeling of stability and control over the situation.
Kate, I just noticed a question come in there as well when we're speaking about flexibility. And for the leaders in the session here, there was a question around this concept of flexibility. And I guess adversely to flexibility is this idea of control. And if our employees aren't in the workplace, how do we know what we're doing or what they're doing rather? And I wonder then if we can elaborate maybe just a little bit, not to derail us too far, but if there's a way for us to explore some of those maybe constructs that we've had around why we require employees to be in the workplace. And some of these, I guess, kind of age-old ideas of having people in one place means we know what they're doing. So
yeah, it comes back to that lack of trust if you don't have the trust on the team. And to build that trust, it really involves creating that openness, having a room and almost reliably being able to be your complete self with each other on the team. Now, it goes back to that thing I said about the brain when we have missing gaps, right? When we're a leader who's used to seeing people in person, and we're actually biased towards those people we see more often in person. It's that similarity and proximity bias, right? We then fill in those gaps. So as leaders as well, you fill in the, well, what if my team is just snoozing on the couch? Or what if my team is not actually working? Luckily, again, I'm going to kind of take away those excuses because we've got ways to track our productivity. And it really needs to be less about hours and when you're working, for some occupations that matters, but also about what you're producing. So being able to have an open dialogue about what outcomes you want to achieve as a team and how you want to meet those, and being really open about what you need from your people, and then asking them to be open with you about what they need. For example, flexibility for me. I'm a night person. So if I can have flexibility to actually do some more of my creative work in the evenings, I'm going to be way more productive than if I'm trying to force my brain to get that out in the morning. It's not going to be as good. Yeah.
Cool.
Awesome. And then it also relates to the next one, which is supervisor support. So, this one again it makes sense, right? But how as a supervisor, how as a leader, can we be a protective factor for our teams? If you ask yourself one question today as a leader, how can you be a protective factor for your individual and team resilience? So being a supervisor that's going to support resilient outcomes to your team is really what we've been talking about, but being compassionate, trying not to get into the emotional empathy where you're actually feeling what your team is feeling. Because we've seen actually in research, nurses who are higher in that empathy spend less time with their patients, right? We can't actually help people if we're feeling it as strongly as them. But what we can do is show compassion, which actually means just to understand and acknowledge what people might be experiencing. So one thing that you can do as a leader and encourage your team to do is to notice what is going on with your team and with each other. Notice when people are acting a bit differently than how they usually are. They may be louder or quieter than normal, maybe feeling a bit off. Notice the kind of verbal tics or, the kind of rash statements of, oh, that meeting sucked. Okay, acknowledge, I noticed you were feeling a bit off in that meeting. How are you? Asking really openly, not are you okay? Because it's easy to say, yep, but how are you? And then ask the second time to really get out what's going on with people. And don't put this on just yourself as a leader or as an individual. If you tend to be a toxin handler, those people that people go to when they're feeling down, have this be something that the whole team needs to be accountable for to keep that team up, right? So we all need to notice this. And what we can all do is just help each other label what we're feeling. Oh, I'm feeling like I'm languishing. I'm not excited about the next thing, but I'm not burnt out. I'm not too stressed. I'm feeling meh. All right. Labeling that, we know from research, is the one thing that can really help us manage those emotional ups and downs. And then sharing, creating that space for people to acknowledge how they're doing and to role model this, no matter who you are. We are a species of reciprocity. So if you share something, people are more likely to share back as well. You sharing that you're having an off day tells people that's okay to have an off day. It's called mutual self-disclosure or reciprocal vulnerability. So make a point to actually share that as well, and you'll get more people sharing in return. And then make it just as a collective responsibility to act on that, to support each other how you need to. All right, we're going to go through the next few here. This next one is one of my favorite around positive emotions. So this is a protective factor for individuals, but there are interpersonal emotions. So not listed up here is actually love. We feel companionate love for people at work at times, especially if you've worked with someone for a while. So how do we cultivate that? We can do that through gratitude. It's really the currency of relationships and building trust as well. So how do we acknowledge what people have given to us at work, the help or support? And how do we exchange that, right? So feeling grateful for someone in a genuine way, expressing it, and then receiving it in return just helps all of us. Humor is another great one. Just because we're going through stuff that is serious and it sucks, if you can help make light of the situation, it's a huge buffer. So as a team, have inside jokes, as long as you're not leaving anyone out and they're not sensitive to differences, right? Have a hashtag or a meme that you always send around when something crazy happens. Add more playfulness and humor into the everyday as a bit of a buffer here. So one example, practically, have a bit of a challenge to see who can do funny email sign-offs on your internal emails. Maybe you don't sign off every email as best or as kind regards, right? Maybe you do later alligator or see you in 2024 or whatever it is. Just try to make it funny, right? Make people laugh. The same thing is, relates to being playful. This doesn't mean you have to overdo it with the virtual game nights or whatever that might be, but make a point to bring playfulness into problem solving. Get creative juices flowing. You don't need to do it with an Excel sheet. You can do it in different ways, right? But have those kind of cocktail making nights or art classes, especially if you're working in a virtual way. It just helps make work a bit more playful. All right, coming up to the end here. The other key thing is team self-efficacy, or that confidence that your team has that you can get through the not so great stuff. So this is taking a strengths-based focus on being able to solve sticky problems and bounce back from tough events. So one thing you can do as a team here is have a strengths session. Invite everyone to come together, take a moment to celebrate wins, but also reflect on what the team does really well, a team collective strengths, and point out what you have actually done before in the past. So what challenges has your team already faced? What other things have you bounced back from, right? Celebrate the team success, and then go around and talk about individual strengths of the team. especially related to individual ways of dealing with stress. Who is your jokester? Who is the Energizer bunny that makes sure we just keep going? Who's that emotional rock? Who's the analytical thinker that's always bringing that rational point of view? And celebrate those strengths as well. Touched on psych safety already. So really being able to create an environment where people feel open to share mistakes, failures, ideas that are just wild and weird and crazy. To do this, to actually build psych safety, you'll learn about that in a bit. But as a leader, what you can start doing is start noticing yourself. Notice how you react. How do you react when somebody gives a bad idea? Like, it's just a bad idea, right? If you have a trusting, open relationship with them, you probably can laugh it off. But if you don't have that built up yet, how do you react to that in a team setting when somebody suggests something that you know, actually, that's never going to work? How do you react to mistakes that people share with you or complaints? Right? And creating that openness by trying to be a bit less judgmental, being a bit more mindful in those conversations. And then the last one is one of my favorite. And this is something that's it's kind of hard to put into an exact phrase or word here, but it's activities that you can do, routines, rituals that keep you moving forward. This is huge for individuals as well. Something that's just going to keep your momentum, even when you feel like you're languishing. So for those people who maybe have had those back-to-back Zoom calls every day for the last couple of years, right? And you just feel like, oh, you just need to reset and kind of go back to the basics. So to help with this is to engage in some of those basic human activities that are repetitive and that really kind of even out or smooth out our brain, right? So walking, doing activities like knitting and rock climbing and yoga. These are activities that get us into a mindful state of flow. So being able to get caught up in an activity that's challenging enough, but fun enough that you lose track of time. And flow has been suggested in research as a combat to that languishing. So practically at work, make sure you have time blocked out in the week for people to not have meetings. To just create a little bit of a break in that back-to-back so people can get caught up in flow in their work to be productive. And then create some team challenges with this as well. So something you can do is have people take their normal walks, maybe if you're in lockdown, and actually pick up trash instead. I did this yesterday. I got a fork, a lid, one of those little fish soy things. Just something to make it a bit more purposeful. One big thing that helps us in these times is actually learning as well. So it doesn't mean you have to add on a new hobby or an extra challenge, but what can you do to actually stay learning that helps us feel like we're moving forward in a purposeful direction? So that was a lot with those practical skills. The main message that I'm going to leave you with is that building resilience doesn't mean you're just building up one mindset or one skill or one muscle. It is actually about building or nurturing and cultivating these protective factors. So building up these things that kind of add into your parachute or your trampoline when things go wrong. So I'll pause there. We'll take some questions and I'll just give you one last tool at the end.
Great. Okay, I have a really good question here from Jess, and I guess it kind of relates a little bit to that personal emotional section that we were talking about. And what she's asked is how, when we express perhaps a negative emotion in the workplace, how do we then handle people who aren't so open or maybe
just listening to something? I'll be with you in a second.
Those emotions that we're experiencing, and we express that and it's kind of shut down by others.
Yeah, somebody has their speaker on. I think it may have just turned off, so I may have missed some of that. So just experiencing negative emotions at work and they're shut down, is that the question?
Yeah, essentially, how do we cope then with I guess people invalidating our emotions? Yeah This
is a tough balance, especially for leaders to kind of get at here. We don't want to move into toxic positivity where we just are like, everything's sunshine and roses, don't have any complaints about our team or organization. We're great. We need to focus on the positives. Mm-hmm. That's true. Those positive emotions, like I talked about, they play a role in this. But we need to know that emotions are fleeting. What we feel it for a bit of time. And we can't just create like a baseline. We always feel good things. So acknowledging that we're all going to have negative emotions once in a while. What we can learn from that helps us move forward. Having some of these kind of things to do helps us move forward. So those kind of back to the basics, repetitive activities. What I say is, if you are hearing people having negative emotions at work, simply just acknowledge it, right? Give them that space to acknowledge it. If you share this at work and people aren't sharing it back or they're shutting it down, talk to someone else, talk to your leader, or kind of just share what is going on. And maybe do it in a way that you're sharing advice, because everyone is experiencing these things. So say, hey, I felt like crap last week. I took a personal day and I really just walked around. I lost track of time. I just spent some time outside in nature. Just little things like that to say, okay, I'm sharing something negative. I'm acknowledging that it's real. I'm a human. But then it's not saying, okay, well, I'm fine now. It's actually saying, here's something that I did about it. And knowing that you might be helping people by sharing that experience as well.
Yeah, and I guess for a lot of people, and when we're often, I guess, in the workplace and we are expressing how we're feeling with other people, if it is perhaps what's deemed a negative emotion, quite often it is helpful for us to recognize that the uncomfortability that other people experience as a result of us expressing ourselves, it's just that they're maybe not ready sometimes to be there with us. And that's not a reflection of ourselves as well. That's also just a reflection of someone else's kind of, I guess, incapacity in that moment to provide that emotional support that we need. So
exactly. And then we just kind of getting out of our own heads in those moments, even when we're feeling really crappy, is noticing that other people might actually be going through something too. And we can't help each other if we're going through those things. So just acknowledge that and say, okay, and really find other sources of support. There's so many protective factors that can help us when we're feeling off. So explore what works for you as an individual.
Absolutely. I'm just looking through here at more questions, guys. Does anyone have any questions relating to any of those protective factors that Kate has discussed? I'm just scrolling back up and taking a look here. Sorry, I'm trying to have a look as we go.
Oh, good. I'm just going to pop up this last tool since we're running out of time. And I know some people might want just a little bit of time before their next meeting or running off to get kids. So something that you can do is a simple tool like this. It's a quadrant. You can pop it together on a piece of paper. You can pull it together on a slideshow that you work with your team, a PowerPoint deck, or Excel if you want to get funky with Excel. And create a bit of a plan for your team, because we can't just do one thing. Like, we can't just put our team through an escape the room experience and say, we got through that challenge. We are resilient now. I wish that would be cool. We have to nurture these protective factors regularly. So create a plan that's going to involve the habits or rituals you might put in place as a team that you decide on works for your team. And then be able to come back to those things, especially when things go wrong, so that you can say, I've got this plan. We can pull it out. And it's almost like a parachute for our team to help us handle whatever we're facing. So it's a 4S plan that I've adapted from some researchers in Europe. And in the top quadrant, you're going to put some sagacity, fancy word of saying kind of shared wisdom. This could be quotes or sayings that your team actually really enjoys and kind of can unite around, creates that sense of belonging. It could be a song lyric, or it could be a shared meme, really, that you just go to. Decide as a team, so this is something you have to do with your team, to actually decide what we want that to be, right? It might come up organically. Take note of those things that happen organically and celebrate them. On the top right there is around strengths. So doing that strength session to reinforce the confidence that you have in your team as a whole, but also in each other to increase that belief, right? Maybe we're not seeing each other, but actually saying to your team, like, I know you've got my back when things go wrong. Thank you so much for that. Well, that person who hears that is not going to let you down the next time. You've just kind of reinforced that with them. The bottom left is support. So that social support and supervisor support. How does your team support each other? So that could be, that mindful communication, exchange of gratitude. You could also be going around and saying, how do you like to be supported as a team member? Do you like to actually keep things personal at home? That's great. Just share that with your team. If you have that special need or you have a pet peeve, like, oh, I always get a spike of stress cortisol when I get an email late at night, even if I try not to look at them, right? Just share that with your team. And then the last one is solution-seeking behavior. So decide as a team how you're going to create flexibility to adapt, how you carve out time for that shared online synchronous working, but also to create the flexibility so people can attend to their family needs, and set some goals. So this does not have to be added pressure. Set a fun goal for yourself. It could be learning something new, doing a mindfulness course. It could be learning how to bake bread if that's what you want to get into. And it doesn't mean adding something to your schedule always. It could actually be in subtracting. So I want to make a goal of leaving meetings at least 5 minutes early, and setting my meeting time so that I can get some breaks in. So set those as a team. This is the first thing that you can really do after the session. Come together tomorrow, come together next week, and decide on this. And then don't just file it away, bring it back up. Come to it, refresh it regularly. And then it almost feels like a labor or a birth plan. It's something you can pull out to give you comfort, even if everything just is upside down when it actually happens. So use that as a bit of a parachute.
This is fantastic, Kate. And while you were speaking then, I was just reflecting on that first concept actually of sagacity. And for anyone who's perhaps ever played in a sporting team before, the first thing that came to my head, because I grew up playing a lot of soccer, was if we had, like that halftime meeting and we were losing the game, but we used to have things called war cries. So it was like the song that got everyone amped up again, and like we could go back on the pitch after that. And we really felt like we had this reinforced sense of kind of like collective goal after that. And like it really fired us up again. So that for me, like immediately came to my head, like, oh my gosh, I have experienced that. And it actually, I think sometimes when you really internalize that feeling of getting really fired up with your team around you, you actually find energy that you didn't realize you still had.
That's it. That's why we sing together in our religious practices. It's, my sports team, I think we had a Mulan song that we used and it did the same thing. So yeah, I love that. And again, if you come up with some good ones here, please share them with me. I'll just pop my email into the chat if anybody wants it, but I know we are over time.
Yeah. Guys, thank you so much. I'm just going to quickly address a few questions around resources. Yes, this webinar has been recorded. You will receive an email with our replay of that. We'll also give you some fantastic resources as Kate has on the screen here, and we'll also aim to give you the important slide decks and the exercises that you may need. I will also pop Kate's email into that email that I sent to you as well. So should you want any additional consulting, or if you'd like to chat with Kate directly around how she can work with you and your team on resilience, I will provide you her contact details. And please, if you feel like this webinar has been beneficial to yourself and your team, please do share it with others. We love hosting these free and live so that we can try and help as many organizations and people as possible. And I'm very, very grateful that Kate has given us her time today to share her expertise in this space. I've certainly learned a lot. For me, it's felt like it's really helped me break down this construct of resilience and actually develop some language and some tools around things that we can actually do about it, rather than kind of talk about this, toughing it out and those things and those misconceptions that we've always associated with resilience. So thank you so much, Kate, for your time today.
Thank you all. I'm sorry I didn't get to address more in the chat, but I've actually saved it, so I'll read through that, and really appreciate everyone engaging today. Thank you for joining. Thank you, Rhoda, for having your camera on, mask and all. Great to see you. I hope you all have the great rest of your day.
Thank you so much, guys. And again, you'll be getting an email with all of the resources soon. So thanks, Kate. Thanks, everyone in attendance. And I look forward to reaching out and connecting with you all again soon. See you in next week's webinar. See you later.